The invisible daughter of a great American man. You could say my father was the American dream personified. Thomas Hayes, a name that held weight in every aerospace boardroom from Houston to Huntsville. He spent 42 years at the same firm, grinding his way from junior draftsman to CEO. He believed in early mornings, clean shoes, and firm handshakes. He wore starched shirts even on Sundays and carried himself like a man born to lead. To the outside world, he was a legacy in motion, a man who built rockets and raised patriots. But behind the closed doors of the Hayes household, things looked different. At least they did from where I sat. I'm Rachel Hayes. I'm 34 years old. And I've learned that some of the deepest wounds aren't visible in family portraits. They're buried in what's left, unsaid. Growing up in Austin, Texas, our house was as rigid as a military barracks. My father ran our home like a flight schedule. Everything had a protocol. The lawn was mowed every Saturday by 8 a.m., church at 10, lunch at noon, and no one dared challenge the rules. Love in our house wasn't absent. It was just formal. We were fed, clothed, and educated. But affection? That was rationed like a luxury we couldn't afford. My brothers, Brandon and Derek, were the golden boys. They were built in his image, broad shoulders, straight backs, futures filled with uniforms and leadership. Brandon captained his ROTC unit in high school. Derek rebuilt a Chevy engine before he could drive. And me? I was the quiet one in the corner, sketching constellations and reading about black holes when other girls were trying out for cheerleading. I built a model rocket from soda cans and copper wire when I was 11. It launched 14 feet into the air. My mom clapped. My dad asked if I'd stolen the parts. He never said I wasn't enough. He didn't have to. It was in the way he introduced us at dinner parties. This is Brandon, just promoted to captain. Derek heads up our testing division now. And that's Rachel. She's creative. Creative, as if it were a flaw. At first, I tried harder. I worked nights at a diner to help pay for college while studying aerospace engineering at the University of Michigan. I graduated with honors. He didn't come. He sent a text. Congrats. Didn't realize that was today. That was the rhythm of my life. Work hard, hope for recognition, get silence in return. When I landed a job at the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, yes, the JPL, I thought that might turn the tide. I was 23, living off ramen noodles in a studio apartment in Pasadena, filing patent paperwork at 2 a.m., because I believed someday he'd see me. I became the youngest woman ever to lead a division at JPL by age 31. And still, every Thanksgiving toast was for the boys. I used to sit at those family gatherings with a polite smile, sipping wine that tasted like disappointment, wondering what more I had to do to be seen. It wasn't about jealousy. I didn't want to replace my brothers. I just wanted to exist in the narrative. See, in families like mine, traditional, buttoned up, steeped in pride, daughters don't always fit the mold, especially daughters who ask questions, who don't follow the script, who refuse to be background characters in someone else's story. My father loved order, and I was chaos wrapped in curiosity. But I never stopped hoping. Not really. Even as a grown woman, managing satellite arrays and negotiating with NASA project leads, a piece of me still wanted to hear him say, "I'm proud of you, Rachel." Just once. That's the part we don't talk about enough, isn't it? How grown adults can still ache like children for the love we didn't get. How success doesn't silence the child inside us who once looked to the sidelines and saw no one clapping. We talk about the American dream. We glorify the self-made man. But we rarely ask, what does it cost his daughter? Because for every man like Thomas Hayes, respected, accomplished, revered, there's a story in the shadows. The story of the daughter who cheered him on from the sidelines, praying he'd turn around. This story isn't about bitterness. It's about truth. about finally saying out loud what too many people, especially women, keep tucked behind forced smiles and perfect resumes. If this feels familiar, maybe you were that daughter, or maybe you're raising one. Either way, know this: silence isn't strength. Recognition matters. And just because someone doesn't clap for you doesn't mean you didn't deserve the standing ovation. My name is Rachel Hayes. I was raised in the shadow of a great man, but I built my life in the light of my own worth. And that, finally, is enough. When achievement isn't enough, the cost of being overlooked. If you read my story up to this point, you already know I wasn't the daughter my father expected. What you may not know is just how much that disconnect shaped everything I did and everything I became. In a world that celebrated sons who followed the rules, I became the daughter who broke the mold. And I paid for it, not in punishment, but in silence. By the time I was 25, I had already submitted 2 patent applications, co-authored a published paper on thermal propulsion dynamics, and was part of a classified mission review panel at Caltech. I ate vending machine dinners, slept on a futon, and logged more hours in clean rooms than in my own bed. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was trying to belong to somewhere. If not in my family, then at least in the stars. And yet, every time I called home, the questions were the same. How's the weather out there? Still working on that space stuff? Your brothers say hello. Derek just got promoted again. I once mentioned in passing that I'd been asked to present a proposal at a NASA leadership symposium. My father responded with a 5-second pause, then, well, don't forget to stay humble. I wish I could tell you that didn't sting, but the truth is I still measured myself by his silence. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I'd fly back to Austin like clockwork. I'd show up with a bottle of wine and a heart full of hope, and I'd leave with the same old ache. One year, I brought a photo album of my team's Mars rover work. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd ask to see it. He didn't. Instead, he pulled out a new plaque Brandon had received from a military training program and passed it around the table like a trophy. I don't remember anyone asking what I'd been up to. To be clear, my brothers weren't villains. They weren't cruel or dismissive, at least not intentionally. But they were used to being the center of the story. They didn't know how to share the spotlight because they'd never had to, and my father didn't help. He turned every moment into a competition I never signed up for, and then acted like my lack of applause was proof I didn't belong on the stage. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It doesn't look like abuse, it doesn't leave bruises, it leaves questions. Quiet ones that whisper, "Am I enough? Did I imagine all this? Why does it matter so much?" The worst part? You begin to gaslight yourself. You start believing maybe you are the problem. Maybe being different is a flaw. Maybe you're too ambitious, too intense, too emotional. You stop celebrating your wins because no one else ever clapped. By 29, I had earned my place as the head of JPL's Systems Engineering Division. I oversaw a $70 million segment of a Mars orbital project and led a team of 42 people, mostly older men who had once doubted me but now deferred to me. On the outside, I was thriving. On the inside, I was still looking toward Austin, hoping for a nod that never came. I started seeing a therapist that year. When she asked what I wanted from my father, I said something I hadn't said aloud before. "I just want him to say he sees me." She nodded. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You can't fill a well with a leaky bucket." I didn't understand what she meant at first, but over time I realized my father's approval was a bucket full of holes. No matter how much I poured in, awards, promotions, breakthroughs, it would never hold. Because the problem wasn't me. It was how he'd been taught to see worth. In uniforms, in order, in obedience. not in questions or curiosity or quiet brilliance. Still, I kept trying. So when the invitation came to attend his retirement gala, I almost didn't go. What was the point? But a part of me, tender and still wounded, needed to witness it. Needed to see if the man who'd built rockets could finally acknowledge the daughter who'd learned to launch her own. I told myself I wouldn't expect anything. I wore a simple black dress, styled my hair the way he liked, classic, no frills, and rehearsed a neutral speech in the hotel mirror. I even wrapped a gift. A small frame photo from the one day he had actually looked proud of me when I was 12 and had just won the district science fair. It wasn't a power play, it was a peace offering. I thought, maybe, just maybe. But I'd soon realize, sometimes what we think is a final attempt at connection is actually the first step toward closure. You see, the greatest tragedy wasn't that my father didn't cheer for me. It's that he didn't even realize I was racing. The box that said everything. I didn't expect magic. I didn't expect a redemptive hug or a proud tear slipping down my father's cheek. But somewhere deep beneath the decades of emotional armor, I still harbored a fragile sliver of hope. The kind of hope you don't say out loud because saying it makes it real, and real things can be broken. The Hilton Ballroom was dressed like a scene out of a corporate fairy tale. White linen tablecloths, towering floral centerpieces, men in tuxedos, and women in understated designer dresses. The slideshow, playing on loop behind the podium, showcased my father's legacy. Shaking hands with Air Force generals, presenting at aerospace symposiums, cutting ribbons at facilities bearing his name. The screen glowed with grayscale images of strength and success, of a life meticulously built and just as carefully curated, but not a single image of his children. No Christmas mornings, no Little League games, no science fairs, especially not that science fair. I arrived early, of course I did. Anxiety, for me, always arrives in high heels and 20 minutes ahead of schedule. The valet took my black Tesla with a raised eyebrow like I was a tech girl pretending to be someone important. Maybe I was. Or maybe I'd become someone so far outside of my family's blueprint, they simply didn't recognize me anymore. Inside the ballroom, I hovered near the entrance, clutching the small gift box wrapped in navy blue paper and a silver ribbon. Elegant, restrained, just like I was raised to be. Inside was the photo, our photo. Me at 12, holding a blue ribbon and beaming. My father beside me, smiling like he actually saw me. I'd found it a few weeks earlier while cleaning out an old file drawer. My hand had trembled as I held it, because I remembered exactly how that day had felt. Not joyful, not perfect, just seen. For 5 minutes I had mattered. That night, I decided to give him the photo. Not out of spite, not even out of bitterness, but because some truths are too heavy to carry alone, and I was tired of being the only one who remembered. My mother spotted me from across the room. She waved, quick, discreet. Her way of supporting me had always been quiet, from the corners. I nodded back, unsure if it was gratitude or resignation swelling in my throat. "Look who finally made it," Brandon said, swooping in like a politician mid-campaign. He smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. Derek followed behind, nodding as he adjusted his tie. "Rachel," Brandon said, giving me a hug that felt like a networking handshake. "Still working for NASA or SpaceX or wherever you're at?" "Still at JPL," I replied evenly. "The telescope place," Derek added, grinning. "Dad always says that's more science club than real engineering." I smiled, practiced, and polite. "Well, we did help land a rover on Mars, so I guess the science club's doing all right." They chuckled, dismissive, not cruel. But it didn't matter. I'd heard this script before. Eventually, the event organizer called everyone to their seats. I stood alone at the edge of the room, fingers tightening around the box, unsure whether to take a chair or take the exit. Just then, I felt my mother's hand gently touch my arm. "Please don't leave," she whispered. "He'll say something. He has to." I nodded, because some part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the night he'd finally say, "I see you." Then the lights dimmed. The MC took the stage with rehearsed charisma. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate a titan of American industry, a man who has devoted over 4 decades to innovation, leadership, and legacy. Please welcome the one and only Thomas Hayes." The applause thundered. People stood. I did not. My father walked on stage like a senator about to deliver his final campaign speech. He paused for effect, surveyed the room like a general before battle, and began. "This has been the journey of a lifetime, and I wouldn't be standing here without the support of my incredible family." My breath caught. Maybe this was it. Maybe I had been wrong. He smiled. "My sons, Brandon and Derek, have always made me proud. Both of them followed in my footsteps. Both chose to serve, to lead, to build. Everything I achieved, I owe to them. They represent the Hayes name with strength and honor." The room erupted in applause again. People glanced at my brothers like they were royalty. Then his tone softened, almost wistful. "Not every child has what it takes, and that's okay. Not everyone is cut from the same cloth. Some wonder." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. It was the coldest line I'd ever heard. Veiled in nostalgia, wrapped in respectability, but aimed like a dagger. My face flushed hot. My heart thudded in my chest. There it was, my legacy. The curious daughter, the question mark, the disappointment. A few people laughed, polite, sharp, deadly. I stood, every head turned. I didn't rush, I didn't cry. I walked to the edge of the stage and held out the box with both hands. "From your biggest failure," I said calmly. "Enjoy your retirement." He reached out reflexively, confused, unsure what was happening. I turned and walked away, heels clicking across the marble floor, a sound more powerful than thunder. I didn't look back. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my parked car in the garage beneath the hotel for over an hour. My hands were steady, my breath even. What I felt wasn't panic. It was clarity, cold and cleansing, like stepping out into a snowstorm you've seen coming for years and finally letting it hit you. The messages started pouring in. Friends, coworkers, even my cousin Elena, who I hadn't spoken to in years. But I didn't answer any of them. I knew where the story had turned, and I knew I had just walked off a stage I was never meant to stand on. Later that night, my father would open the box. He'd see the photo. He had read the note. "This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now." And for the first time, he would be the one left, speechless. What healing actually looks like. I didn't cry. That's what surprised me the most. After 30-some years of chasing my father's approval, of rehearsing smiles and biting back truth, of contorting myself to fit into a story that was never mine, I thought finally letting go would break me. But it didn't. It calmed me. The kind of calm you feel after a storm tears through town and you step outside barefoot into wet grass knowing it's over. The destruction is still there, yes. But the wind has gone quiet. That night, after I left the Hilton, I didn't go back to my hotel room. I didn't pour a glass of wine or call a friend. I sat in my car, parked in the furthest corner of the garage, engine off, radio off, silence all around me. The box was gone. The moment had passed. And yet, something unfamiliar settled over me. Relief. On the passenger seat, my clutch buzzed with notifications. A dozen text messages, missed calls, my mother, of course, my best friend from college, Sophia, who'd warned me not to go, and Derek, of all people. The message was just 4 words. What was in it? I didn't answer. I wouldn't, not for a while, because some things aren't meant to be explained in texts. Some moments exist only in silence, in space. They're not meant to be debated or defended. They just are. What was in the box? A photo. A memory. The only evidence I ever had that my father once saw me, not as a nuisance or a creative anomaly, but as someone worthy of pride. And under that photo, the truth. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now. I knew he wouldn't open it during the party. Thomas Hayes cared too much about appearances to risk being rattled in public. But I also knew that once the applause faded and the lights dimmed, he wouldn't be able to resist. Because if there was one thing my father hated more than disobedience, it was not knowing. I imagined him sitting alone, fingers loosening the silver ribbon, unfolding the navy paper, lifting the lid, and then staring at the girl he had forgotten, at the version of himself he'd buried. I spent that night in silence. No music, no distractions, just me, breathing. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory lap. It was something smaller, but deeper. It was freedom. The next morning, I walked the length of downtown Austin, past breakfast diners and joggers with earbuds, watching people live like nothing had changed. And maybe, for the world, nothing had. But for me, everything had shifted. My phone, when I turned it back on, lit up with 38 unread messages. I skipped over the ones from my brothers. I already knew their contents. You went too far. You embarrassed Dad. You always make it about you. The usual chorus, the soundtrack of growing up invisible. But one stood out. From him. We need to talk. Just 5 words, no apology, no anger, no emotion, just a directive, as if I were still expected to show up, sit down, and listen. And maybe part of me should have ignored it. Maybe I should have blocked the number, deleted the thread, boarded a plane, and never looked back. But I didn't. That evening, I drove to the house I grew up in. The red brick facade looked exactly the same. The porch light was on, always was. A symbol of stability, or maybe just denial. I let myself in with the old key. It still worked. Funny how some doors stay open long after the heart behind them has shut. He was in the den, sitting in his favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather arms. The photo sat on the coffee table in front of him. He didn't look up when I entered. We sat in silence for a full minute. Then he spoke. I don't remember that day. Of course he didn't. That's the difference, I said. It was important to me. He flinched, just slightly, but it was there. He looked at the photo again, then at me. You think I never cared? I don't think it. I lived it. He exhaled slowly, set his jaw. I pushed you, he said, because I saw something in you, something sharp, relentless. I shook my head. Number you pushed me away. There's a difference. He looked like he wanted to argue, but for the first time in my life, he didn't. I didn't know how to handle you, he admitted. You weren't like the boys. You didn't need approval. You questioned everything, challenged me. And that made me less worthy of respect? He didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Finally, he muttered, You reminded me of my father? He never approved of me either. And just like that, the pattern revealed itself. A family heirloom passed down through generations, not a watch or a medal, but resentment, repression. a belief that love should be earned through obedience, and emotions were liabilities. I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted. So, I was punished for being like the man who punished you. He looked away. You were never a failure, Rachel, he said. I just didn't know how to raise a daughter like you. You didn't try. He nodded, once sharply, then looked at me again. I see you now. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't enough to undo the years. But strangely, it was enough. Because I realized something in that moment. I had spent decades believing his silence defined my worth. But it didn't. It never did. The failure wasn't mine. It was his. His inability to embrace what he didn't understand. His fear of the daughter who didn't just follow, but questioned. 2 weeks later, I woke up and noticed something strange. The ache was gone. Not softened. Not numbed. Gone. The need to prove, to be chosen, to earn something he was never equipped to give, it had vanished. Not with a bang, but like a quiet tenant who packed up in the middle of the night and moved out for good. And for the first time in my life, I felt light. Turning pain into propulsion. I returned to Los Angeles on a quiet Sunday morning. The sky was clear, the flight smooth, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. There was no drama at the airport, no teary goodbyes, no lingering regrets. Just me, a carry-on bag, and a new sense of stillness. Not numbness, clarity, the kind that only arrives when you finally stop reaching for hands that never reach back. JPL welcomed me home like nothing had happened. In our line of work, the universe doesn't pause for personal milestones. The lab was prepping for the launch of a deep space satellite array, one of the most ambitious risk assessment operations we'd ever attempted. I stepped back into my role as systems director without missing a beat. But I was different. Not louder, not colder, just grounded. The version of me that used to shrink in boardrooms or over-explain her ideas had quietly packed her things and left. 10 days after my return, my division head poked her head into my office. "You're still good for the STEM Summit next month?" she asked. I blinked. I'd nearly forgotten. "You're the first female lead from JPL they've invited in over a decade," she added. "And, well, given everything, your story might mean more than you think." I knew what she meant by everything, not just the headlines or the whispers about that video from the retirement party. She meant the story I hadn't been telling, the one so many women carry like a second spine. The one about working twice as hard in rooms that barely notice you're there. I said yes. Not because I wanted to be a symbol, but because I realized I already was. That night, sitting on my balcony with the lights of Los Angeles glittering below me, I opened my laptop and wrote the first line of the keynote speech. Sometimes the greatest fuel for a rocket isn't fire, it's rejection. The words poured out of me. I didn't sugarcoat the truth. I wrote about growing up in a house where being the daughter meant being doubted, about achieving more than anyone expected, and still being greeted with silence at the dinner table, about how brilliance, when wrapped in the wrong name or gender, often goes unnoticed, even in your own home. I wrote about the night I handed my father that navy blue box, about how it wasn't an act of rebellion. It was a declaration of peace, about how we don't need to set fires to get free. Sometimes, we just need to stop standing in rooms where we're unseen. The speech didn't go viral overnight, but the clip from the STEM Summit did eventually catch fire. It made its way across women in tech forums, college engineering pages, and even career coaching circles. The comments flooded in. This hit harder than I expected. She said what I've always wanted to say. I didn't read them all, but I read enough. One line from the speech seemed to stick with people. You are not obligated to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you. Simple, but for so many women, revolutionary. The summit led to an article. A journalist from a Women in Leadership magazine reached out. She wanted to profile not just the moment at the gala, but what it meant. What it said about growing up invisible in your own family and still becoming someone worth seeing. I hesitated. Then I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to every daughter who sat in the back while her brother got the spotlight. Every woman who was told she was too emotional, too ambitious, too much. So I said yes. The article was titled, "The Failure Who Made It." It opened with a description of the moment I handed my father that box. No shouting, no tears, just quiet power. But what mattered more was everything that came after. The resilience, the work, the decision to build a life on my own terms. One paragraph stayed with me. Rachel Hayes didn't burn bridges. She simply stopped building them where they were never meant to lead. That line, that was it. That was the story I'd never had words for. Because for years I thought setting boundaries made me cold. That walking away from family expectations made me selfish. But now I understood. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They show you what to let in and what to leave behind. A few weeks after the article ran, I got a message from a name I hadn't seen since childhood. Elena Hayes, my cousin, my father's sister's daughter. We'd barely known each other growing up, but her message was simple. I read your story. It made me cry. My dad treated me the same way. Always said boys were the future. Girls were decoration. I wish I'd had your courage. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to rewrite the story. I responded with one sentence. It's never too late to stop shrinking. Because that's the part nobody tells you about healing. It's not a clean break. It's a slow unraveling. 100 small moments of choosing yourself when it would be easier to stay silent. My brothers never reached out. And honestly, that was fine. I'd stopped performing for people who only saw me as a problem to manage. My mom did call, though. Our conversations were cautious at first, like walking barefoot across glass. But eventually, the words began to thaw. I should have done more, she whispered once. I should have stepped in. I know, I said gently. But I also know you loved me, even when you couldn't show it in front of him. And that mattered too. The legacy I chose to build. 3 months had passed since the night I handed my father that box. Since I stopped waiting for applause that was never coming. Since I stopped editing myself to fit into a family script I hadn't written. Life didn't suddenly become cinematic after that night. There was no swelling orchestral music or ribbon-wrapped redemption. But there was peace. The kind that seeps into you slowly, like morning light through half-closed blinds. The keynote speech kept making the rounds, shared in classrooms, women's networking groups, even passed around in corporate boardrooms. It wasn't about going viral, it was about being heard. For once, I wasn't just someone's daughter, sister, or employee. I was a voice, a woman standing on her own story. And then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in sharp block letters I knew by heart. Inside was the photo, the same one I'd given him at the gala. On the back, a message in his handwriting. I didn't forget this day. I tried to. It scared me how much I loved that version of you. You deserved more than I gave. I'm sorry. No signature, no grand gesture, but this time I didn't need one. Because I'd already forgiven him the moment I stopped needing him to say it. Later that month, I spoke on a panel at a local university. Young women in STEM, first-generation college students, girls with big dreams and scraped knees. I told them the truth. That sometimes the biggest obstacle wears your last name. That proving others wrong is nothing compared to proving yourself right. And when one of them asked, "How did you know it was time to stop trying?" I smiled. "I didn't," I said. "I just woke up one day and realized I already had my own approval." That's the legacy I chose, not the one built on silence and tradition, but the one built on truth, voice, and choice. Because sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is walk away, not in anger, but in clarity, and never look back. When silence speaks louder than words, Rachel Hayes' journey is one many of us recognize, even if we've never spoken it aloud. It's the story of chasing approval from someone who doesn't know how to give it, of growing up in a home where success was expected, but emotional validation was withheld. For middle-aged Americans reflecting on their own families, either as children or now as parents, Rachel's story reminds us that love isn't about perfection, achievements, or obedience. It's about being seen. Too often we carry childhood wounds into adulthood, believing we've moved on simply because we've aged. But unresolved emotional neglect leaves invisible scars. It teaches us to overachieve, to overcompensate, to search endlessly for external praise, in the hope it will quiet the child inside who still longs for recognition. The truth is, healing begins not when others finally acknowledge us, but when we stop needing them to. We can't rewrite the past, but we can break the cycle. Whether you're a parent, a partner, or a friend, choose to be the person who sees, who hears, who values. Because the quietest tragedies in life aren't caused by what's said, but by what's never said at all. And sometimes walking away is the first act of love for yourself.